Morning, everyone. I'm going to call this special meeting to order. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our statement of values if we have them with us? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have a statement of values with us? We don't, so please be seated. Assistant City Clerk, roll call.
Yes. Councilmember Mahan. Councilmember O'Neill. Councilmember Davis. Here. Councilmember Watanabe. Councilmember Shahal.
Here.
Councilmember Hardy. And Mayor Gilmore.
Thank you, and I believe we're waiting for Councilmember O'Neill. She'll be arriving any minute now, but could I please have a
I'd like to
motion?
make a motion to excuse Councilmember Karen Hardy.
So there's a motion to excuse Councilmember Hardy and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're just it's just an oral vote on things. Okay, thank you. Next, we have public comment. If there's any member of the public would like to make a comment, now's the time. Don't see anyone at this moment. So now we're going to start our session on governance. So do I turn this over to the city manager or to Jen? Thank you. So you can kick us off and get us started.
We'll do that. So it's a pleasure to be here again with the Santa Clara City Council. Thank you so much for inviting me back. And I think I've introduced to most of you Mandy Brown, my colleague from Management Partners, who is going to be assisting me today and recording on the flip charts. You can already see what beautiful printing she has. Because after today's session, we'll be preparing a session report for you like we did last time. So you'll have a record of this and of your decisions and agreements that you've made today. So let me just make a few comments about the objectives. Three fairly straightforward objectives for today. One is to start out with reviewing the experience that you've had with districts since December. We were back here together in December, and experience with your norms. Determine modifications needed to the principles, commitments, and norms and protocols that you agreed to in December. That's where we're going to spend the vast majority of our time today. And then as a result of our time together, it's always an objective that I put on all of these workshop agendas, which is to strengthen teamwork. Just an opportunity to be able to talk together about commonalities with regards to principles and commitments is, I hope, an opportunity for you to strengthen your teamwork. So that's also an objective. I had the opportunity to interview each member of the City Council earlier in the summer, or midsummer, I guess it was, to prepare for this. And I do that as a starting point to hear what it is that you would like to do in this session. And what I heard from you in terms of objectives is that it would be helpful to review the three principles. We are going to do that today. And we do have a handout that we'll be going through with regards to the three principles that were established. I heard from you that there are a number of the commitments and norms that were established that need some clarification, or maybe even some modification. So we'll be going through those one by one. Some of you, in fact, had some suggestions for how those could be modified. And then in a couple of cases, there were some suggested new ones to be added. So all of those have been incorporated into the material that we're going to go over today. And same with some of the protocols. One of the nice things of having a check-in like this is that sometimes, in a vacuum, we're developing principles and commitments and protocols before you've had experience with something like districts. Now you've had some experience, and now you can say, oh, this is what it's really like. And so it's a good time to say what we need to do to change and to make some adjustments. So it's the same goes for the protocols. And then We're also going to talk a little bit about the implications of staff workload and needs. As I was interviewing council members, that came up in a variety of different ways. As we were going through some of the commitments, I heard comments from council members about, oh, you know, we've got a lot of, we do the priority setting. We have a lot on our plate. Not so sure about scheduling, you know, things getting done. We need to talk a little bit about workload. So we'll have an opportunity to weave that in to some of the discussions today as well. The ground rules for today, these are just sort of typical ones that I like to suggest just for success, is to, first of all, listen to each other's points of view. There are 7 on the council, 6 of you able to be here today with different points of view, all valuable, some different, some the same on any particular topic. So the benefit is being able to hear each other's points of view. Seeking consensus where possible doesn't mean that you have to agree on everything, of course. I mean, that's part of our system. But where possible, seeking consensus, always assuming good intent, because you're all elected to do the best that you can possibly do for the city of Santa Clara. You just go about it differently. You have different points of view. If, as we're going through this morning, you think that we've gotten off kilter a little bit, just speak up and say, hey, Jan, you know, why are we doing this? Let's change courses just a little bit. I value that. And then staying focused. And as facilitator, that's, of course, my role to help us stay focused so that we can get done not only on time, but who would like to get done a little bit early today? Okay. I know you had a council meeting yesterday, and I know that people have lots of other things that are on your list to do. So my intent is to help you be efficient with your time today and to complete these tasks as early as possible. So those are the ground rules. Bike rack, we will have a bike rack. Mandy's put that together. And that's just to capture things that may very well come up that Deanna may need to follow up on and or other staff at another time. So that's the overview. Any questions from council members on what we're doing here today? Okay, then I'd like to turn this over to the city manager.
Good morning, City Council. I want to thank the City
Would you
Council.
like this to advance your slides, or do you want me to advance them? How would you like to do that?
I'll advance them.
Okay.
After we got our training already, I clearly wasn't paying attention. I know. I'm still waking up. I want to thank the City Council for showing up this morning. I know the turnaround wasn't easy, and it is a great expression of your commitment to addressing the issue of governance that's before us. It certainly reflects the discipline that you are using as we all acknowledge the configuration change from governance that we're going through. We on pages 5 and 6 of your report, it outlines the 3 different configurations, and this is something that we had the opportunity to talk through last time. I want to just follow from yesterday's conversation, because I think that was an excellent way to really bring to life the conversation that I'm interested in. That's governance, and being intentful around governance provides me better information about how to provide services, how to distribute resources to council priorities, as well as how to frame policy discussions that are important to the city as a whole and also as a district. And what I particularly focused on last night in terms of quality of dialogue is that the council was very candid around the political environment and the impact to services. And through the Public Records Act discussion, we were able to hear from council members that when politics or elections when it's election season, that it has a direct impact to city services. And I thought that was a good example, because one of the dialogues that we're having within our city staff side is we have 7 elections next year. And while we are politically astute and politically neutral, we have to plan for that in terms of educational awareness, information, as well as just the politics as they surfaced in yesterday's discussion. And so we're very much aware that the transition that is coming before us next year, the council district transition, it is no doubt going to impact how we deliver services, the pacing of our services, and just the natural infusion of politics that happen. And so the ability to have a candid discussion is important to me because we want to be aligned to the city council. We want to continue to provide high quality service. We want to understand the priorities and the ever-changing nature of them. And the quality of discussion today allows for us to better think through how we go forward. I want to also just start that as a reminder for us all, and soon we'll see the employee survey results, that we do have high ratings when we look at our services. So this isn't an area where we're starting as in a deficiency mode. We're starting on high notes where 64% of respondents for our community satisfaction felt we were doing well. 88% feel the quality of life in Santa Clara is positive or excellent. We do know where we can make improvements in terms of other areas, and we do know where we're ranking pretty high. But it comes because of these performance levels that we want to continue to build upon them and be intentful about how we look at service delivery. So these you already know around the community survey results, and they're more of an optic to acknowledge that we're starting at a good baseline and that the ability to be mindful about next year and also where we're at with our community survey results are important for us to think through, to do no harm, to not have these go downward, but at the same time remain responsive to the council and the community. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jan. I can touch on, sure. So there's some of the slides include a preview of the employee survey results, which the council will receive in October 8th. And as I mentioned, from the community standpoint, we are faring very well. And we are also faring very well when we did our first employee survey. The results are being prepared in final form. And what we're hearing from the high-level roll-up of the results is that the workforce is committed to their work. They do acknowledge the heavy workload in the manual process. They feel they are supported in the workplace and that they play an important role with respect to their services that they provide to the community. They do believe that their direct supervisors and coworkers are doing excellent work and they enjoy working with them. In terms of identified areas for growth, they do desire more communication throughout the organization. This is typical of an organization that is transforming from silos into a more integrated organizational structure. They are asking for information about council actions and new projects, as well as just overall council priorities and how to understand how priorities change. They do want to talk about addressing the concerns about unsustainable workload. I don't think that will be a surprise to anybody. And they are enjoying the greater focus on employee wellness through better work and life balance. So you'll see the actual percentages and the data that will come forward on October 8th, but I wanted just to give you a high conceptual preview. So Jan?
So much, apologize. It was in a handout form that we had put together as a firm, just as we're using this with other city councils too, as a reminder that when you have a positive work environment, and any organization will have combination of some positive and some negative. I mean, there's no organization that has 100% of either one. But when you have a positive work environment, it's something to be preserved. And so it's just always a reminder that the aspects of your work environment that then you as policy makers help to create, and then your city manager and the executive team also help to create and then sustain, those are very important. And as we get into governing principles, it's good to kind of keep those things in mind. So we're going to then begin diving into updating and discussing our governance guidelines. First thing I'd like to do is to hear a little bit from council members about the reality. So since December, and Mandy is going to chart this for us, what has been the reality of working with districts? We have 3 questions. We're just going to spend a few minutes on this. What's been the reality? How has your communication had to change, if it has? And what has the mayor had to do differently, if you've had to do anything differently? I thought we could just set a baseline here, and before we get into the specifics of the principles and so forth. So let me open this up to council, any council member first, as to number 1, what's been the reality of working with districts? Teresa, you're jumping right in there.
I don't think from my perspective, it hasn't been all that much different.
Oh, okay.
I still have a monthly meeting. People have said to me, can I come? I don't live in your district. I say yes.
Okay.
People approach me directly to assist them with issues, and I think this probably happens with everybody. And I said, well, you know, so-and-so is your council member, but, you know, well, but I haven't communicated. So I meet with whoever asks to meet with me, wherever they are. I think I am trying to be cognizant a little bit more, like, you know, like even though we said we didn't want to get into the council district as fiefdom model, I think there is, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, but I think there is some cognizance by the council members of if some project or issue or whatever is connected to a particular district, you know, should you defer to that council member or whatever. But so, I mean, I know we've been playing around with stuff like, you know, what's on our business cards and what's on nameplates and which order are the pictures in and all that, which to me is, you know, something actually that you spend time on when you don't have more important things to do, because I don't think that makes a, you know, hill of beans a bit of difference to the public. The public just wants things done.
So for you, you haven't experienced a lot of change.
No.
Okay. And Pat, you had your hand up.
Yeah, because I would agree. I haven't experienced a lot of change. I hear still from people throughout the city who talk to me about various things. And I think people still see us as city representatives, not representing just our district. That's been my experience.
Raj, what's been your experience? Now, you're in a slightly different situation.
Yes. Being the first from the district as such. I don't think there is a much difference from the point of view of being a council member.
Okay.
People do recognize like we have a district, not all of them, but from the perspective of working environment, I just like Councilmember Teresa and Vice Mayor Mahan, I do get some calls from the outside my district.
Okay.
And we handle them the way it should be. And from perspective of working environment, I don't think district have made any changes.
You say has not changed from a working environment perspective, as far as you can tell.
That's what I like.
Okay, good. Kathy, what about you?
Thank you, Jan. I would say that it's the same. I think as a council, you know, we are doing our best to make sure that we are aware of what's going on in the city and I know when we get emails from anybody in the community, if there's an opportunity to respond to somebody, even if they're not in my district, I'll just send a note of whatever just to say, we hear you, basically. And so, because I think it's important that people need to that they're recognized and they know that they're being heard. But aside from that, I know, from talking to some of the other council members, District 1 is probably the busiest in the city. So with all the change going on up there and anticipated, but so it keeps, I am busy in District 1, but at the same time, I still try to be aware of what's going on in the city, and have actually had other residents from other districts reach out to me as well when, they've had an issue.
Are
So
you busier?
I would say yes. I think I am
So
busier.
your experience has been that you are busier.
But I think that's the nature of the job, even though we're part-time, we make the job what we want it to be. So that's also my choice as well.
Okay. Okay, I think that's an important comment, is that each one of you make the choice, make the job what you want it to be. You want to add on, and then we'll go to
and then we'll go.
to Debbie.
Just before I forget this point, I did want to say that, though, there have been a couple instances, like for my district, and I think this is the hot button, and I'm sure this is a lot of what Kathy is experiencing, and when there's a development or a change like that. So like there's an apartment complex up Homestead Road here that's been there for 40 years or more. And so the owners, the development company wants to they want to intensify, shall we say, and kind of upzone the property. And now they're going to go, there's been a lot of kickback. So people that I had never heard from before, who had never reached out to me, did make a point of reaching out to me because they said, this is your district. So
Okay, so
are
there's
you
some
going
of
to
that.
help us? Because they
Got it.
had, so that I did, that was one of the most prominent examples, but I've had a couple of examples of that, of people I never heard from before. This isn't our district. You are a representative. What are you going to do about this project?
Okay, so that's different. Debbie, what's been the reality for you?
Teresa, I'm so glad you said that. My experience is some people know about the districts. I was elected at large, and
Yeah.
they still have that mentality. Some people don't know where the barrier lines are, so they're not really sure who they should call, but they'll call anyway.
Yes.
Teresa's experiencing, saying, I know you, where do I go, what happens? And then I've got that other group of people that say, you're my representative, you take care of this, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
And I kind of feel that having the council not totally in districts and being at large and then having districts, that people are still a little confused, and we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So, and we're also in that appeal process. So people are in this kind of bubble right now, I want to call it. They're not really sure how to get at us and experience what they've had before. So the service, I think what Teresa hit it on the head. If they know you, they're going to call you and say, help me, because the person in my district isn't listening to me, or they're not responding to me, so can you help me? And I know that's, and Kathy's experienced that, because, she's had people say to her, you're not in my district, but that person that is in my district isn't responding to me. So she has to go out of her way to, do whatever, because that's our job. We take everybody, we want to vote as a city, we want to care about people as a city, but the district is kind of like this wavy, blurry kind of line right now, until there's some kind of clear system in place.
There's no resolution to it yet.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Lisa, what's there been in reality from your vantage point?
Okay, since this was approved since the judge imposed it on us, it's been a real interesting time period, and I think Councilmember Davis pretty much described it, that people are now just getting to know and understand what districts mean.
Got it.
And they're still trying to figure out who their district representative is. I think the most questions I get are, who's my representative? And I say, where do you live? Let's figure it out. Who is it? And they say, what do you, I always defer to the representative in the district, I refer people to their, I said, you should really, certainly talk to me. I'm elected at large. I have to, be responsible to everyone no matter what. But you should also take the moment to contact your district representative and talk to them since they're focused on that area. So people are just getting to know, what it is. So we're acting sort of as we're all elected at large. That's what the people think. But now the reality is setting in that it is districts. And many cases, people are happy about that. They say, okay, good, there's one person that's responsible for my area. There's others that are very unhappy about it because they feel that there's only one person that's responsible for them, yet I tell them you can still talk to everybody. But I really suggest you start with the person in your district, to understand that. So it's still, I think we're still in the educational part where people don't really understand what it means. Except when Councilmember O'Neill brought it up, when there's a development project, they want to go to the person, in the district and talk to them first. So it's starting to happen. I think right now everyone has good intentions. We're all going to, look at the city and vote for the city. But when the voting reality starts hitting, that these are the people you are accountable to and they're going to keep you in or throw you out, things are going to change a little bit. I get a lot of complaints from people that are trying to contact their district representative and they have no success. And so, so that's something that I think our council should work on, that if you have someone in your district that wants to contact you, I mean, out of just courtesy, it's nice if you return their calls or emails, because I do get a lot of that. On the positive side, I've tried to do something that really identifies our council members with their district. So during the State of the City, I came up with a program where each council member was able to honor an individual for public service and a business in their particular district. So it did give the council members a chance to, bring something back to their district and recognize and honor some people in their district, just to get the identity of the council member with the district. So I'm trying different positive things as well. It's not all negative in terms of that. But I think people are still figuring out how it works, because Santa Clara's never worked that way before. But at the end of the day, they understand they need, almost full council support to do anything. But I think as time goes on, there'll be more pressure on the council members to respond to their district. I'll use Councilmember Watanabe in District 1 because she's very, very active in her district. And I know it when I went to National Night Out, they're like, oh, well, Kathy's taking care of our district. District 1 seems to know where their lines are, and they know who to contact, because she did you did a Facebook posting for District 1, like you have your own Facebook for District 1 and different things. So that, and then Councilmember O'Neill, although she's still doing citywide, I think people are understanding because of her her citizen meetings, her resident meetings, that she's responsible for that district. So I think it's up to the council members as to what they do and how they identify with their district. But as time goes on, there's going to be a lot more pressure for them to respond for their districts.
Okay. So we've actually migrated, which is good, into the second question about the way that you've communicated, whether that's shifted a little bit, because you've actually commented on that a little bit, Mayor, and several of you have talked about meetings and the way that you're communicating with people, and that you're taking phone calls from people, as you always did, take phone calls. But is there anything else that any of you may want to offer by way of communications that may be different, or just comments that you want to make about what needs to be different, or that you want to work on, per the mayor's comment in that regards? But Raj, you had your hand up.
So on communication, one thing is social media. We have Nextdoor, which is not as per our council districts. So that is a issue basically, because let's say my area is not in my Nextdoor geographical area. So I don't see that what's coming on that. And if I get an email or something, that's good. But if I don't get that next door communication or next door discussion going on, I don't. That's a hindrance. Like, I don't know how to fix that, but that's an hindrance. Like, part of my district is not in my next door area, so that becomes a deterrent to communication on social media.
Okay. Yeah, Kathy, other comments about communications?
Yeah, I believe I raised this issue when we met previously because actually District 2, which is Councilmember Chahal's district, is in my next door.
Oh,
And so, but I can't, I have to say, before we had the district elections last year, I actually, the area that is now in his district, was part of my district, and I responded to those people. But I have to say, I mean, they have, you know, they've gotten to know me. They got to know me, but just based on communications that I've seen, I mean, I've referred people, you know, when they've asked me questions, they said, you know, that are from District 2. I've let them know who their council member is, so that they know to reach out to, know how to reach out to him. Which I think is, again, you know, important. But at the same time, people have you know, prior to last year's election, they knew that I was the elected in the North Side, and they would see my postings on Nextdoor, and they knew to reach out to me. But I think, you know, one thing that's been a little frustrating, but I understand why we need to do it, is just the separation of like our city business. You know, we have to make sure we keep our city business away from our personal postings, and identify, you know, that we are representing the city. And so, like on Nextdoor, for instance, I mean, I've always established myself as a council member, and it says it in my profile, and so people know to reach out to me. And the funny thing is that part of the Nextdoor, again, that I'm a part of, includes North San Jose. Well, guess what? I have people from North San Jose contacting me saying, I know you're not my representative, but can you help me with this? Exactly.
Can you help me?
Because they know I'm responsive. So, and then I'll say, you need to contact District 4, or here's another number to call. So I mean, if nothing else, you know, we're building bridges, as we're supposed to be doing, reaching across the borders. But so we keep those communications. But here's the other, that I will say, this is the downside. You know, we have an issue out in the North Side right now. And I really appreciate the city's support on the issue, both between the city and the police department, illegal street racing. And I brought it up, and it's been a focus, and there's been a survey done, and we're awaiting the results of that. I understand it's been very successful. However, here I am. I'm communicating to my constituents with information that's valid. And the next thing is, I'm getting a PRA request from a local media asking for all of my emails and communications that I've had with my residents. So I felt violated, actually, because I felt like I'm not doing anything wrong, but yet somebody's out there taking my postings and sending them out there to establish I don't know what. But at the same time, I wasn't doing any, I was communicating with my constituents. So if anything, that's a downside, that it could be used possibly against you later on. But at the same time, you know, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm not saying anything, I'm going to keep doing it. But at the same time, it's a downside that people are out there, you know, for whatever their
Maybe just be a good
agendas.
reminder, though.
I want to say of all the council members, Kathy Watanabe is the most active on social media in terms of citizen responses and activity, and that in turn has really generated a lot more work for Councilmember Watanabe, because she is so active. And I think one of the things that you talked about earlier is that, you know, it depends what each council member wants to bring and how they intend to conduct their business as a council member with the public as to activity, because the more you're out there in terms of being at events and being active on social media and just being, you know, active, you're going to you're going to create a lot of responses back, which requires a lot more follow-up. So
Right.
I think that's, on the positive side, that's a way of engaging with the community, at least through social media and other ways.
Debbie and then Pat.
Okay. The communication thing was, and the mayor and I had gone to a League of Cities conference down in Long Beach, and one of the topics that we attended was about social media and politics.
Okay.
And they basically warned us not to engage because it grows organically. And they thought the best way was to develop a strategy that we could communicate with the public, but not put ourselves in a defensive mode or get ourselves caught up in this. And since the internet's come and there is a lot more social media outlets, they basically advise that either we have a centralized Facebook page where they can not really comment, well, we should push out information, but not have it open so that we have that kind of back and forth. You said this, you did this kind of thing, which Kathy is experiencing. And to an extent with Teresa, she's in the public and experiences it one-on-one. So they kind of advised us that to take the information, try to disseminate it in some way, but maybe we need to find that filter within or some kind of process that we all follow so that we keep it, the messaging, the narrative, a positive, informative, but not have a call out where we're going to open it up to somebody to antagonize and bully and come back at council members saying you don't know what you're talking about or whatever. So I thought that when we attended that session for the League of Cities, that was a really telltale thing. And also in that, Lisa and I got to hear about other things that happened to other council members throughout the state of California, that the things that they experienced. So the lesson that we came back from that was it's a gift and it's a curse, but how do we control the narrative and how do we control the messaging that we need to get to our community without having that reaction and getting into that back and forth that Kathy's been experiencing.
Okay. Since there's interest in that, Mandy, make a note on the bike rack, because as we are going through some of the procedures, I think there's a logical spot to actually loop back into the social media question. So, but I just want to make sure that we make a note of that. Pat, yes.
Yeah, Councilmember Davis brings up some really good points because I've always felt that social media is not governance. And perhaps we can have some centralized Facebook, if you want to use Facebook, or even on our city's web page or website, have pages for each district, a Q&A page or something, some official channel so it doesn't get caught up in social media and get spread around and you have no control. You have no control. I had some questions, though, about, because we don't have policies in place or even procedures in place for handling communication. Do we really want to have questions from someone who lives in a district, because it could be a question about a citywide issue, or it could be a question from someone in my district, but about a development that's happening in Teresa's district or something like that. So do we really want to do we want to have channels of communication where if it's coming from a resident of your district, but to another council member, that the council member has to refer it back to that person, to the council member whose district it is? Or do we want to, and then how do we make that referral so that we are assured that the council member gets that referral and can respond? Because there are no procedures or policies in place to make that happen. There's no way to channel that communication. If someone in District 2 gets a call and it's a project in District 6, how do you make sure that that loop gets closed?
I think we'll put that on the bike rack as we are going through the procedures of referring constituents to whom. So we'll
If we even want to.
even want to. So we'll make sure, because it is related to something we have down, but we'll make sure that we cover that today, this morning.
And then one other question comes up about communication, because the districts will probably largely stay the way they are, but the district boundaries will change with every census or with every, as a county registrar changes district boundaries and does redistricting, and how do we handle that?
Yeah, that's definitely a bike rack issue. Yeah, no, I mean, that is a reality for the future. Absolutely. Okay, just quickly on the third question, Mayor, you've already talked a little bit about what you've had to do. Is there anything else that you've had to change in the way that you've functioned as mayor because of districts?
I think that as they're understanding what the districts are, and they know that I'm elected at large, it puts a lot more responsibility on me, because they say, oh, I have my district represented, but you're the one, you represent everybody, so you are also my and so it's a lot of
Okay.
education, but it's more work, certainly in the mayor's job, to make sure that, because you're responsible and elected by everybody. So it's certainly, added more to it. And what's interesting, this council is pretty active in the community and does a lot of outreach. And as a result of that, we get a lot of feedback in terms of emails and phone calls. We get so many emails every day, and typically they come into mayor and council, so we all get them, and trying to get them to the right person in the right district. I think as Council Member Mann, Vice Mayor Mann has said, it's been it's challenging to get them to the right person, but they do get to the right people, and some of us respond and some of us don't. So, I mean, but that's a personal thing for each council member, and, we're held accountable at the end of the day to the public for either our district or the mayor, city at large. So it's challenging during this midterm, and because the fact of the matter is these 6 districts now were imposed on us by a lawsuit, which is going to end. The imposition, I think, ends after November 2020. So something may change, and so the districts may change after, in a little over a year from now. It depends on our appeal. It depends on what the charter change, happens. So even though we have this now, it may change, and that's going to be even more challenging if 6 goes to 2 or 3 or whatever, or stays at, we don't know at this point. So we're in this limbo time period that we're doing as much outreach as we can, but knowing that, it's in a year and a half, it could be different as well. Just sort of be flexible now is the important part, but our citizens are very engaged with us because we're engaged with them. And channeling how we communicate with them, how, each council member decides to do it on their own. Everybody's independently elected, so they can make their own decisions as to what they do. But when you communicate, very actively, as Council Member Watanabe does, through social media is a fact of life. I mean, it's there, and it's how a lot of people receive their information. So we have to deal with it. We have to deal with it. I don't know what the perfect answer is.
There's probably no perfect answer. Maybe one more comment, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, one of the responsibilities we have is we have our calendars, and which has become very important as a way for people to see how busy we are, see what we're up to, and they really get a good gauge of, who is working for the city. And I've had many people tell me that they look at our calendars and they said, we know who's working in the city. And so, but again, it's not even a reflection of the phone calls or the emails and different things like that. But our calendars, which we are responsible for, are also a good gauge for people, to see what we are up
Good. Yeah,
to.
that probably goes under communication, because that's good information for the public, actually. Okay, good. Well, that's a good kind of an overview, thought starter for moving right into reflecting upon the commitments and the principles. So I would like to ask that you pull out one of the documents, and it looks like this one. It looks like this one. Yes, it's just one page. Okay. But we have also up on the PowerPoint each one of these items, but it may be an easy reference for you as well. So in December, through the discussion, the council agreed that there would be 3 principles that are overarching, that you care about and will govern for the entire Santa Clara community, that you'll follow your ethical values, which are long-standing. In fact, this city is known for its ethical values, and you serve as a model for many, many cities, which is just terrific. And that you'll follow your council manager form of government, also long-standing kind of a thing here in the city. And so when I interviewed you, I asked for feedback on those. And so what we have in each one of these slides, we have a summary of the feedback that I got. And so under the next column or box that says work to do, what we'll do is we'll discuss just each one of these principles and then determine, you as a council, determine what you may want to do differently about the principles. So the feedback, just in short, is what's the right balance? And this is the conundrum between focus on your district, focus on the city as a whole. And I don't think there is a perfect answer for that. But that was some of the feedback. And then also being clear to the community that the entire council has responsibility for the entire community. Of course you do. One council member cannot make a decision because it requires a vote of the majority of the council. So the system of government still remains the same. And that most issues, the big issues that you have, are really citywide. So those were some of the comments that I heard as I interviewed you. So what I didn't hear was that there was any disagreement with this principle. But is there any, so just throwing out to the council then, is there any follow-up that should be in that little box that says work to do? Yes, Mayor.
I think I'll start because I think right now our council has the concern for the city as a whole and the issues that we're dealing with, because my opinion is we are in this sort of limbo honeymoon stage of having this district reality. I don't think the district reality is set in with us.
Okay.
I look at what happens in the city of San Jose as the ultimate district reality that comes forward. When you look at those city council members in San Jose, they have a district the size of our city.
Yeah.
So when you want to do business in San Jose, you have to go to the district representative. And then the district representative, depending on what side they're on, will check with the mayor to see if it's okay. And then, you know, that's the way it works. And when I have tried to talk to other San Jose district representatives about an issue of the whole of San Jose, they're really focused on their district. So I look at that as the place we do not want to be. And
got it.
so
Okay.
I'm wondering what work can we do now so we don't end up there, which is the mini mayor system that people talk about, you know, in San Jose and other cities that have those types of districts. I don't want Santa Clara to go down that path, and I see it's inevitable unless we take steps to keep us looking at the city as a whole. Otherwise, to be very frank, District 1 is going to have all the issues in the city. Everything's in District 1. Everything of major proportions. We have a university in District, is that 5? 5. Still learning the district. And some other things, but we have to have, you know, the lens of the whole city. And I don't know how, we all have good intentions now. We're doing it now. How do we maintain it after the voting reality sets in of the district election?
And that's really the conundrum, is an important question. So what might be an example of a step that the council could take? And Pat, you had your hand up.
Because for me, the district elections were imposed by the court in order to rectify racially polarized voting in Santa Clara. And that's all. To me, district elections are a voting system and not a governance system. Once you're elected, you represent all of Santa Clara. I don't make a distinction. I have a very active law practice, and I get a lot of clients from the North of Bayshore area because they come from high-tech companies and they live up there. I can't tell you how many times, after we discuss our legal business, they'll sit down and still talk to me about city business. And, I don't say you need to call another council member. I do my best to answer their questions and have discussions with them. And, I get calls from all over the city, and probably because I've been here so long, people know me, I get stopped in Safeway. A whole shebang, like we all do. So, to me, we represent, once we're elected, we represent all of Santa Clara. We should be responsive to every Santa Clara and every business. I know from the developer side, they'll talk to all of us. They don't come, like the mayor said, we don't want to be San Jose where the developer has to come to the district first almost to get permission to proceed. That's not the way we want to govern. So to me, it's not a governance system like it is in San Jose, where it is a mini mayor system. They have their own budgets, they have their own staff, they have things that really just, they're insulated, each district. To me, that's, as I agree with the mayor wholeheartedly, that's not where we want to end up. But I think when we start to think of districts as a governance system and not merely a voting system, I think we, the council, need to get on the same page as to what does district voting really mean? Does it really mean district governance, or is it simply district voting? Because to me, that's what it is, and we represent the whole city, each one of us.
So, yeah, Raj.
So I'm the only one got elected as a district person, right? So I would put it this way, the main policy matters like traffic, I can't solve within my district.
Right.
It is, I have to cooperate, and all the city council members have to cooperate with that. And so my perspective, even though I got elected from a district, is that some of these policy matters are not restricted to the district. And that's how we should be governing, basically. Yeah. There are some smaller issues, like, say, some code enforcement and other stuff. Those will come directly to me for a district perspective from the residents of that district. But some of the issues are environment, traffic, convention center. Those are like bigger global issues, and we have to take decision perspective from the whole city as a perspective, not from a...
Well, and I would suggest that the language that you use and just how you talk about these issues will set the plate for you in part, so that if you do talk about the Santa Clara issues, such as the environment, you mentioned that, or traffic, and you reinforce among yourselves that through your language that we're talking about the city of Santa Clara's traffic issues, as opposed to even if the traffic signal in question is in District 2 or whatever, it still impacts a whole variety of areas. Then you can be conscious of that, and that may be a way that you can reinforce for yourselves and for the public that you really are looking out for everybody in this community, and which of course you are. So, but I think being aware of what you don't want to become is a very important step. And also, you're so different. They're a 1 million population. You're a tenth of that, or well, you're bigger than that. But anyway, but you're much smaller than that. So being aware of those differences but the language that you use can be very powerful. So I think there's obviously consensus on the council that what you don't want, and using your language and not pinning yourselves into a corner of if something is in Kathy's district, but obviously it is a citywide issue, then maybe not deferring to Kathy, for instance. I'm just picking on you. Yeah. You're used to that, aren't you? Yeah. But having a conversation with others on the council, stepping up in a leadership role too. So there's but I think you will have to be very conscious of that.
I think some of the issues will come to light, you'll see, when we have development issues. Let's say, for instance, there's a high-density apartment project proposed on the El Camino in someone's district. That's when you're going to start to feel it as a district representative. one of the development projects that Councilmember O'Neill had mentioned was a project on Homestead Road. And that project, I went to a special meeting where they had several hundred people there in the neighborhoods that were very upset about that project. So once you start seeing something like that, and there's, you know, a mass amount of organization in a district, and that's when you're going to start to see the effects of a district representative and district representatives' accountability in that particular district. So I think that when it comes to development, I think that's when we're going to really start to see, you know, a lot of that pressure on the particular council member. So I just wanted to point that out.
So I agree with what the mayor said, and I appreciate what Vice Mayor Mahan said. And then I think, you know, that, you know, I think that that's kind of, you know, that's a more elevated view. But I think the reality for some people may be closer to what the mayor has said. I think that, like I said, you know, we won't get into what we think about the court decision or not, but the voting method versus the governing method, I think, like I said, that shows a more nuanced thinking. But I think the reality may be when you've got several hundred people at one of the local churches there, you know, not with pitchforks, but
Almost.
you know, I mean, they care, they're committed, they're, you know, and I respect that. And when we talk about social media, that's part of the way that, and it's in some ways it's good. People are telling me, oh, I've met so-and-so and so-and-so, and we lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and I didn't know them, and now I know them, and now we're meeting at each other's houses, and we're doing this, and, you know, and they're organizing.
Okay, yeah, then we're going to move on to the
To the
next.
same effect, the reality
It's a big one.
is, when you come up for reelection, that's when they're going to get you. They're going to say, either you vote for this project, you don't for this, I'm going to take you out. And that's the reality. So, and you're going to face that. So that pressure will come. Right now, elected at large, 2 people elected by district. So they're not feeling that right now. But they will feel it. And the way the divisions are, some people might not have big developments in their neighborhoods. Right. You know, and the district lines will change eventually. But at the same time, some people are heavy weighted, like Kathy. I hate to pick on Kathy.
Lucky Kathy.
She has so much in her territory that's the reality of her right now, because she will be up for election and they might say to her, I don't want this, you're doing this, you're, you know, creating. She might have that problem. Yeah. And that's the reality. So, I understand how that goes. And the meeting that Teresa did attend, you know, they thought it was in my district and they were, you know, you better not, I got the same thing. You better not vote for that. You better stay away from that because you are not going to get reelected. I will make sure of it. So you get the threats. So that's what I did. I threw Teresa right under the bus. But no, I mean, it is the reality. So I don't know how we work around that until we completely get to the non-hybrid that we live in right now.
Yeah, but I think having a principle, though, is a good starting point. And so I didn't hear any change in the principle. And this discussion of what you know you don't want to do, where you don't want to go is also good, is just to keep that in mind. Okay, so following our Santa Clara ethical values, the feedback that I received is at some point, not today, but to review the ethics principles just as a refresher. So again, not today to review them, but that to put that on your work plan and at some point to take a look at that. I don't know if that's scheduled or if you do that annually, biannually. I have no idea, but anyway, that was a suggestion. So, any other comments on that? I'm kind of looking at the city attorney on that one. Is that scheduled already, or is that something that could be scheduled?
I mean, there's state mandated AB 1234 training, but we don't have. I don't think there's a schedule for the Santa Clara ethical principles. I mean, we have the local ethical guidelines that were enacted, I think more than a decade ago. And I think council members are acquainted with those when they take office, but I don't think there's a schedule that was set forth about reviewing those. But if that's something council wants to do and review the principles themselves, and maybe if they want to update them or make changes to them, I think that's something we could bring forward.
And I think you have a governance committee, or you have some sort of a,
Maybe bring that idea to governance first and then to the full.
It's a governance and ethics committee.
governance and ethics. Okay, so we'll put that down as an action step, take it to the governance and ethics committee, since that was a suggestion made. Okay. And then the third one is follow the council manager form of government, and the feedback, again, not really to do it today, but to do a refresher on the council manager form of government. And in part, I think the suggestion that I heard had to do with the public. Now with district elections, and since I'm facilitating, others in our firm are facilitating a lot of these workshops with, many other cities have gone to district elections, so you're not alone. There's some confusion on the part of the public about what does it mean, and now what's the city manager's role? Is that changing? And of course, it's not changing, except that there's more work, typically because of some additional information needs and so forth. But so there was a suggestion that at some point there be a review of the council manager form of government to just be clear about what does it mean, and the fact that it doesn't change, and that may be something of benefit to the public as well. So any comments on that?
I think when you brought up the public, sometimes we get emails that are requesting something in their district, and they need to understand what's going on. So I'll use an example. I just got one the other day. There was an issue with the way trucks are parked, and they can't, when they come out of their street, because the trucks are there, they can't see around them. And the elderly people are having a hard time.
Okay.
So I took the email, referred it to Deanna, and then she disseminates it to where it needs to go, and told me I'll have an answer within a week, whatever. So then I emailed him back and said, you will have an answer from staff, to get there. So I think that outside the people that live in the districts or in would call us, their concern is, how do I get my problem to you to get it resolved, and what is that process? I don't think they're understanding that. So, and they have to understand that we hire her.
Yes.
And we have that council manager thing. I have to go to her to make sure that I get the information that I need and then re-disseminate it. But in the past, I've had a director call me and say, do you want me to directly reach out to that person or you?
Sure.
But I think we need to have us reach back out so that they know that we've gone through the internal process, that it was addressed, they know that it's in the process, and just have some kind of procedure that we all follow.
Okay, and we're actually going to get into a number of those procedures in the commitments. We're going to move into that, because when we discussed some of the procedures in December, and then I met with each one of you in the summer, there were some of those areas that were needing some clarification. So we're actually going to get into those. Yeah. Deanna, did you have any comments right now, though, on this you'd like to make?
I think an opportunity for a refresher is always a good thing. And I particularly like the focus being from service delivery, because it is something that is top of mind for me in terms of how do we respond to the council's needs at every level, from the constituent level, like the parking, to the policy level. So any opportunity to talk to that is, I welcome it.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay. So we have some slides on a refresher here, just as a, and Deanna, did you want to go through these, or do you want me to?
Why don't you go through?
Okay, yeah. Not to spend a lot of time on these, but of course, and this is as much for the public as anybody, Santa Clara does have the council manager form of government, and electing city with an elected city attorney, city auditor, and an appointed city manager. Santa Clara, though, is unlike other city governments in that you have a lot of services that other cities do not have. So when you're comparing your services to other cities of similar size, and I'm sorry, Pat, I'm standing right in front of, can you see it? You have a lot on your plate that's very different than other cities. So we just put a bunch of those kind of things in here that are a little bit different. So in terms of the refresher on your governance structure, city attorney, representing and advising the city council and officers on all legal matters. City manager is your chief executive of the city, as well as the chief executive officer of Silicon Valley Power and the executive director of the stadium, and provides oversight of the Santa Clara Convention Center. That's very different than many cities, very, very different. And then you have a city auditor, professional city auditor, who manages the financial audit and performs other performance audits for the city. So those are a little different in terms of city auditor. Many cities do not have a city auditor. So the city manager is responsible for Santa Clara's 4 lines of business: the city, Silicon Valley Power, Stadium Authority, and the Convention Center.
Jan, can I just interrupt on?
Yep.
I want to be mindful that I recently sent an email about the city auditor and the potential change in staffing there, and particularly as it impacts, if you go to the next slide. Our city auditor has been very active in each one of these categories. And I do want to work with the council on scheduling a conversation about a check-in in terms of her request to be relieved of the duties for personal reasons, as well as the impact on auditing for these 4 different lines of business. That is something that's very important to me because it's been very welcomed. Usually you don't hear a public agency saying audits are welcome.
Yeah.
But I am anxious to get that conversation started, and I wanted to communicate that because if there is consensus, we can prepare for a conversation with the city auditor upon her return.
Can I ask what the timing is on that? Because I see it's a council appointment, so we want to make sure we have enough time to go through a process for appointing. Do we have a timeline on that yet?
She's scheduled to return back to work in October, and the date is being further determined.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Just any comments on the council manager or appointees? Okay. So we're going to get into the commitments list, but it's 10:10. Would you like to take a 5-minute break? You've been sitting here.
I'm surprised in this chat.
Well, I'm glad that,
It's the carbs.
okay, we're going to keep moving. And what we're going to focus on now are the commitments. And so again, if you take a look at this sheet, table 2, and then we're just going to be going through this PowerPoint. So starting at the top of the commitments list, the first 2, when I interviewed council members, there were no comments on the first 2 commitments. So I hadn't planned on spending any time on these. These were just commitments about city manager and council will plan strategically citywide. Council members, when I interviewed, you said, yep, let's do it. We're committed to that. The second one, city manager and staff will surface issues where plans, processes, resources, and other areas impacted may not be conducive to district-focused response. And you all said, yep, sounds good. We don't need to talk about that. So most of the others, though, did require a little bit of conversation. So starting with number 3, this has to do with city manager working with the council on governance issues that advance the goals and priorities of the city. The feedback that I received from council members was that you wanted to talk about how the council establishes priorities. You do have your priority setting session in January, February. And so that was one of the comments. And then also discussing referrals and the process involved. So those were the comments that I received. So the follow-up on that, and Deanna, I might want to ask you to make a comment about the priority setting process, because I think you've had an opportunity to think a little bit more about that.
So I think one of the obvious outcomes of the priority setting session was there was good work in terms of hearing from departments and hearing from the current issues. Although I did not do a good job at making sure that our directors were metered and well-paced. And so it did shorten time for a more thorough discussion from the council to actually look at the priorities and balance them out for us for the year going forward. One of the things that I'm focused on this as we go into next year's priority setting session is I do want to change that up, since a lot of the information will just be an update. And so we can get the directors much more quickly through the council in terms of just providing a quick update. And then we have consolidated all of the referrals, all of the budget priorities, as well as the existing priorities that date back to 2017, so that the council will have at one glance everything that is charged for implementation. And then we can focus our discussion on all of the priorities. And there's hundreds of them that fall within different departments. So I am looking at switching it up when we, for our next governance committee, we'll take, or one before January, I think I'm looking at Nadine, October, we'll take that conversation so that we can get more input. But I do recognize I need to shorten it.
So you're going to take the process discussion to the governance committee in October? Yes. And then have the governance committee bless, this is what we're going to do in February?
And then
okay. Okay. Will that meet your needs?
I think so, because it was I think a really great priority setting session. It's just at the end of it, we were cut short and we weren't able to discuss our priorities, or as a council, put them together to prioritize the priorities for the city staff. So we never finished that. And then I thought we were going to have another session to talk about. We never did. And we ended up in the budget session, and we each individually submitted priorities, and some didn't submit anything at all. Right. And so I think it was great up until the end, and then it was cut. And so I'm glad you recognize that, because we just felt shorted that we weren't able to put together, as a group to come, because I think it helps going through the year when council members start to bring in, other issues all the time, which we do because we're active. I want to remind everyone how active we are. And so we're so active. So as we bring things forward and we say, okay, can we take on this capacity or not? we can say, okay, well, we all approved this priority list, but we really didn't this time. So I think if we can change that for next year would be great. So.
Good. Okay. Yes, Debbie.
There were a few people that were watching and attending, and they just thought that it was like one-sided, and they wanted to hear what we had to say.
Okay.
Or what our direction was, because they're out there communicating with us, and then we're not getting out what we want to talk about, or what level of priority it was going to take, and how that was going to be, deflected into the city.
Got it.
For staffing levels, and how Deanna would be able to control what was coming in. And the mayor's absolutely right. I mean, sometimes it's a moving target. We may have that priority list, but something in the community might come in and just zap us. And then what do we do? So what do we move away? What is less important? And everybody believes that their thing is more important than the other person's, but it is what it is. And we have to set a goal and have a timeline and do what we really need to do. But the stress of that hit us this past goal setting. So.
Okay, so it sounds like there'll be a new process coming forward for discussion in October, and then there'll be an updated and revised process in February. And part of that process could be for you to determine how you're going to make adjustments to your priorities during the year as those incomings reach you, which, they will. So, good. Okay, and then the other piece is discussing referrals and the process involved. So what I heard in my interviews with you is that referrals come forward, and staff focuses on those, and in some cases it requires quite a bit of staff effort. Some are probably small, some are big, just in any city that's the case. But there was not clarity about that process. So I wanted to pose that as to whether you need, not to design the new process here, but whether that's something that you need to tune up that process, and if so, should that be given to your governance committee? Or, Deanna, do you want to make a comment on that? But I did hear that from council members.
So we get referrals, and we track them and report out monthly through the council agenda information or executive report out section on how many referrals are open and which ones we've closed and the date that we've closed them. So from that standpoint, we are tracking that information. What we don't have a discussion about, and other city councils do have policies around how referrals are issued. And so it does feel for me as a point of tension at times, in that there's referrals coming out of the council and the timelines associated against other competing priorities, referrals coming out of the committees, and then trying to get them into the full council consensus. And so I do think for me, understanding the priorities as well as the larger body of work, it would be very helpful to hear more input in terms of how do I manage that going forward.
Okay.
And I think that in referrals, I think the governance committee, we tried a process where if a council member has something they want the council to consider, they have to put it on the agenda. And then the council votes as to whether that item warrants further discussion on an agenda or even any staff time to look at it. But I think the way it was written we didn't do a good job in how we wrote it. So I think we have to bring it back to the governance committee just to tighten it up so that it's very clear that you need a majority of the council to agree to further an item that's outside of our priority list before doing that. So I think there was just some misunderstanding in terms, or a little vagueness in the way that the original intention was. And it was because we had council members in the past that would go directly to department heads or ask the city attorney's office to create ordinances and everything without the full council support. And so we wanted to stop that and make sure everything runs through the council directly with instructions to the city manager or city attorney. So we tried to do that, and I think there's still too much vagueness in it. We're going to have to tighten that up. I hope that will help a little bit in terms of what we do.
Yeah. And there certainly are, you're not the only city council who has to deal with that. And so there are certainly examples that might be useful for you to take a look at from other city councils. I mean, part of the challenge that city councils have and staff members have is when you set your priorities, and you're already going to tune up that process. But let's say, so the council will set its priorities in February. You have a set of priorities now, as imperfect perhaps as they are, but you have them. And then other things come in, and so then how are the priorities reset? And because the city manager now has the requirement to allocate staff time. And so a referral process is important to be able to say, and there will be things that come up during the year, but for the full council, of course, I mean, that you're a dynamic, our society is dynamic and cities are dynamic. But for the full council to say, yes, this is something that is important. We do want to study over the next 3 months, or no, let's put this one on our list to discuss in February as a possible priority then. There are different ways to deal with that, but it's more intentional that way. So.
I just want to clarify, we do have a policy. We did adopt that policy.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes. The governance committee did work on that. Staff worked with the city attorney's office, some of our council staff. We did work on that. It was adopted. There might be a little confusion. Maybe the governance committee could look at it to see, do we need to enhance it? But I just want to remind people, and we have been following, or at least I think in the last year or so, there still seems to be a little bit of confusion, but we have been trying to avoid where one person kind of goes rogue and gets, is getting a lot of things done that are not based on the priorities. Just as we're trying to use, we use the same discipline on, budgeting issues. If it's not in the budget, already you have to have a supermajority to change the budget and all that. So we do have some processes, but we can take a look at that and see if it needs to be enhanced. But I just want to remind people, so we have been, I think several of us have attempted to use that process.
Okay, so would an action step be then to refer this question to the governance committee to take a look at it and see if it needs to be tuned up at all? Does that
Right,
make
to
sense?
take a look at it, and we can strengthen what we have.
Okay, good.
Clear up any of the vagueness.
Okay, does that make
Good.
sense to you too?
Good.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so the fourth commitment, city manager will work with the city council on governance issues that may constrain our growth. The feedback that I receive from interviewing council members is, what does that mean, constrain our growth? And I think it's just the language of that phrase was not clear. So
I don't know where that came from, so.
yeah. So it may be one of those things that got written down and it wasn't clear at the time and it got written down.
What does it pertain to? That's what I don't.
Anybody know?
Are they talking about staff?
Yeah, this came off of the discussion from the meeting. And so it may be that if nobody knows what this means, we ought to eliminate it.
Well, I think, in one way, constrain our growth, I could see, like, in terms of our ability to do all the things we want to do, whether that's funding limitations, being able to provide staff. Constrain our growth, I'm thinking about, does that mean the ability for us to achieve goals and not constrain growth, like, in terms of, we don't want any more development?
That's what I was thinking, development.
I'm not sure, I don't remember the context of that.
Well, what do you think, Deanna? If nobody knows what it is.
I don't remember the context,
Okay.
but I also, I did not
The constraint, okay, I'm not understanding constrain the growth. We're looking for revenue streams, we're looking for, we budget, we have priorities. So what are we constraining? I'm kind of like confused as to why that was.
Well, Should we just eliminate it?
Yes. Well, me, I'm sorry.
I would also maybe reframe in terms of
How would you reframe?
what are the issues that limit us from actually achieving the priorities that we seek? We had a good conversation
Okay,
last night
that's
about
different.
just the realities of the public records and how it has impacts. But that's just not the only one. And so an open discussion around things that constrain our ability to work at the peak that we want to, I think would be a.
Okay, something more to the effect of city manager will work with the council to identify issues that may limit our ability to achieve our goals. Is that, and carry out our services, is something like that. So what that does is it speaks to the partnership that your city manager will bring those issues to you to say, if we have these goals, when we have these services we want to deliver, and we have these things that are limiting our ability to be successful. If that's the intent, I think we can rephrase it if that makes sense to council. It's more of a partnership.
Well, I'm just wondering if it has anything to do with our ability to make policy, because by not focusing on the priorities and through the governance committee, and maybe that's another reason why it's good to just take another look at it. But I am just wondering, because I can see where that could have an impact on constraining governance issues, having an impact basically on our ability to make policy because of just because things change, and then it may that other issues that may have been on the list get pushed down, and so then it just pushes us back as a council in our abilities to establish policy. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, to establish policy and achieve your priorities, both. Okay. So sounds like that's more reworded a little bit better. Okay. All right. Okay, so this one, this commitment, city manager will continue to provide the same information to all members of council. So the feedback that I heard from council members is, how can the city manager ensure that this happens regarding events and activities that are city related? So she has 7 people to provide the same information to. So how does she ensure that happens? And a concern that council members who ask questions about agenda items are provided answers, but other members of the council don't necessarily get those answers. So if Debbie asks a question on an agenda, Debbie gets the answer, but not everybody gets the answer, as I'm understanding this comment. So.
But I think we just implemented something recently, the city manager.
Oh, okay.
So that we are now directed to give our questions before council meeting, and then she will have the written response, and then that will go out to the website? Is that what you're?
It's posted on the website on Tuesday.
Okay, so that's changed.
Knows
Got
what
it.
that council member, it's not identified by council
No.
member, but they understand what the question was and where the answer is, so that it saves time on the dais when we have things going on. But, it was a long time ago when Jamie was mayor, and I had questions. And so I gave him a written thing, and then he gave me back a written response. But what he did was he gave it to the entire council. So they saw what my concerns were. So I think that's more open that way.
Okay, so it sounds like that procedure has changed.
We haven't received any questions that we did receive for the first time that we piloted it. We haven't received questions since then. But it's an efficiency measure on our end as well, in that we receive them all at once and then we push out the answers all at once. And we do it non-attributed so that there's no feelings of risk in terms of who asked what questions or things of that sort. But from the administration standpoint, it's a real efficiency gain for us.
Okay, good. Okay. So I could have eliminated that second bullet point, right? Okay. But what about the first one? how to ensure that all council members are informed of all kinds of events and activities that go on.
I think not in every case. We had one recently, but we are pretty much informed about everything. All of us get the same emails about
I
what's
send a lot of emails.
Okay.
happening, and it's not 100%, but we, for the most part, I can't think of many instances where we get a lot of information.
So the procedure is in place to do it.
So I think where you may occasionally have a breakdown, and it's just, partially just human nature. If, like there are oftentimes for issues, there are individual briefing meetings or different groupings. And, something may come up in a conversation or something may be said verbally. And then so one person because maybe somebody asked that question, and it's difficult always to capture everything that goes on in every exchange. So sometimes like I've said something and somebody said, well, how do you know that? And I said, well, because I, was in a meeting and I asked that question. So, so we have to recognize that there are going to be, so that, everybody should recognize, okay, well, we'll try to remember, what were all the kind of takeaways from these conversations. And that can be somewhat of a challenge.
I think also I just wanted to add that there's a lot going on in the city. There's a lot of events, and that's pretty normal. They get memorialized in emails and other things. But for some things that are super important, and there are certain council hot buttons on certain things, having things in writing and distributed to all the council members is really important so that we're all on the same page. With that. But in terms of activities and other things, I think we have community calendars and other things.
So you have procedures in place. Okay. So
I would just note that from the city manager or the executive role, there is a base set of information that I push out, and it's in the blog, it's in biweekly memos and multiple emails. But each of the council members are unique individuals that have questions that are of personal interest or political interest to their own priorities or agenda topics or things of that sort. And that's the part that it's not something that I go, okay, well, Councilmember Watanabe asked me these questions based on her district issues that now I have to go and distribute to the whole council. I think that's...
No, there's a certain amount of discretion.
I don't think there's that expectation as well. But there is base information that just is always being pushed out.
okay, so it's a commitment that's going to stay. So the next one is city manager will manage citywide and speak up where there is tension, lack of resources, or other issues to be addressed. So this, the feedback from council members is that just acknowledging that our staffing is citywide, your systems are citywide, and then how can this commitment be used to manage expectations? So that was a question that one council member wanted to know. And could the city manager be more explicit about that? Is there a way for that to happen? And then how is recruitment and retention impacting the city's ability to get things done? And do we even have enough staff? That's probably not going to get solved today either. But those are very real questions, and they certainly impact your service delivery ability. So in terms of the commitment itself, there was no disagreement on the part of council members that should remain, that the commitment was an important one. But are there any comments that any council member wants to make about the feedback? Go ahead, Mayor.
I think I'll start because I know that this is a big issue for us in really managing our expectations on the council because we hear it all the time.
Okay.
And the ability to get things done. And I know that we've had some staff turnover, different department heads and other things. And I think in order for the council to really understand the capacity of our city, we need to evaluate what is the capacity of the city. And I don't think that's, we've heard, oh, we can't do it because we're so busy and we don't have enough staff and this and that. We hear it. But I think in order for us to really understand, we need to be educated on what the capacity is and really evaluate that capacity to really understand, who's doing what is their workload, and where do we need to supplement resources just to make sure, we're evaluating this properly and really to understand, where we can use our resources well. But I think what's not really sticking with us is just telling us, oh, we have no capacity and we're also busy and we're really stressing staff out. Educate us so we can evaluate it and see where we really need to supplement those resources. And I think an example was last night with the public records request. And until that changes, the volume, as long as we're dealing with certain individuals and organizations, it's probably not going to change. Election year's coming up. It's going to amp up again. We probably had 25 requests after last night's meeting. So let's put resources into that, because I don't want to see our city manager who has other things to do, our city attorney who have big issues to take care of, spending all their time and resources on public records requests when we can hire other people to do that. So if it's a temporary situation until we're able to, really get this under control, if we need to hire 5 people, tell us so that we can do that and free you up to do the city's business. So that's another evaluation for us. So I think, I don't know how we do it, we're not going to settle it here, but to work with the city manager and city attorney's office especially to let us evaluate your capacity so that we really understand it and we can really help and get back to city business.
So one specific follow-up step would be that evaluation in areas where you've experienced turnover, or you have some vacancies, or you have amped up service demands,
and we
such
have
as
so many. We have a lot of new people. I don't even know. I see new faces. Like who's doing what? We don't even know. So maybe it's really an education process, and we could have a study session, just on that.
I actually think this ties to the referrals, in that when we receive referrals, we are able to quantify what that unit of work that would be responsible for the referral can absorb. And I think a good example was a procurement that came, an assignment that came with a 90-day deliverable, but at the same time, our procurement division was inundated with Public Records Act requests and about 5 or 6 really big procurements, everything from garbage, recycling, food and beverage contracts, downtown specific plans, City Hall. And it just wasn't anything that could be delivered in 90 days, but I need to quantify that. And in some cases I have where when building inspectors, I sent an email that we have a 28% vacancy rate. We've not been able to move the dial. A couple months ago, I sent that. 2 of our staff that are charged with hiring in our hiring recruitment division, they departed the city for other promotional opportunities. I sent an email on that. And then last week, I was saying, as part of my executive and city manager report out, that we have over 100 vacancies right now. It's about 11% vacancy rate. And if you just do the math, that's over 200,000 capacity hours that we're short because we have a vacancy rate issue. And I tied that to the public records request, because this is one where we got a needle in the haystack request, and we literally had to say, do we just stop recruiting even though we have over 100 vacancies? Because we now have a timed 10-day deadline to determine whether we have any responsive records. And those are the real challenges. And I'm open to those kind of conversations. I just don't want to I understand my role is to assign the resources. I want to do it in a way that's respectful to the council so that I don't come across as bogging down that conversation, because things still need to get done. I get it. But bringing them into the administrative side of how manual this organization is and how it lacks basic technology that other organizations have had, and how that adds to time is a real key component of that conversation.
And I think that we are already in that conversation
Yes.
because of
Good.
our ability to provide services to the public, and the accountability sits here. And so if we are all, because it seems like if we're all bogged down because of public records requests, sounds like it's crippling our city, then we need to hire people, whether temporary, full-time, whatever it is, to deal with that aspect of it so that it doesn't cripple our city, because our residents are now getting very impatient with us, because our answer can't always be, it's public records requests and we can't do anything else. And so they're getting very impatient, not only on the time we're spending on that, but the resources we're spending. So I think we need to bring more light as to who's asking for these, why they're asking for them, what they're asking for, and let's start publicizing that and getting the people on board to deal with that so we can get back to city business. I think that's important. So evaluating what we do. We don't need to get into the, nuts and bolts of how you manage city manager or how you manage city attorney. But when it starts affecting the services that we have to deliver to the public, we need to understand it so we can talk about it. So I think whatever the evaluation is of our capacity, that needs to be done for us.
I think the added component is the realities of a competitive market that's hard to recruit. We have the council in its wisdom in January said, go hire extra for Public Records Act people, right, to come help. We had somebody got another competitive offer before she could even start. We lost the person, right? We had a public records manager, departed the city. And just retaining and recruiting in and of itself in a competitive market is very difficult. And we're challenged.
And Teresa, you had your hand up, did you? Okay, so Raj, did you?
Just touch it. I want to touch on the retention part of it.
Okay.
I know it's very competitive market,
Yes.
but we should, we lost some very good people and we hired some very good people, both sides. But I would say we should find out whether it's the stress of the job, why we are losing the people, or what are the reasons we are losing the people, basically. And we should do some internal study brainstorming on that.
Always a good question to know why people are leaving, so
Right.
that you
Sort
can
of
address those
we
issues.
know some of the reasons. It's a very competitive market and all that stuff, but we should do some internal brainstorming on that one too.
It's a good question.
I mentioned that our hiring folks were very high performing, left for promotional opportunities. That's a very natural sequence of events. 3 high profile positions, left for burnout, left for workload, and wanted to depart for other opportunities where the work was less.
This is a very, as Deanna used the word competitive, our firm works with cities all over, and it's a tight labor market. It's very, and you in Santa Clara only want the best, should only get the best. And it's tough. There's no question about that. So having a good work environment and having city council authorizing resources, those are 2 really important things. Yes, Kathy.
I just wanted to find out, what does the HR department do in terms of recruitment? I mean, I know I see on LinkedIn some.
Where we were posting them online. And there is a software system that's very common within local government, and that's called NeoGov, where you can digitize the whole recruitment process. Think of it like the bid sync that we've introduced to the council around procurement. It's that version for recruitment. We've been able, over the last 2 years, to begin using NeoGov at greater levels throughout the departments. We piloted it, and we expanded it. And so it does allow for us to push out information more. We look at all of the professional organizations where we can advertise and get the word out, as well as social media, and look at other opportunities that other hiring boards are being placed, where people are placing advertisements.
Do we do anything like at Art and Wine? I know people, use Art and Wine for different opportunities. Do we do things like that as well?
I don't think we have a booth. We did try when we had our Public Works Day, where we had multiple departments. We put a booth out there so that we could advertise positions in Public Works for any residents that were visiting. So we did try that as a new component. We do go out as much as we can, but they're and
Yeah.
So it's, Deanna will continue to keep the council informed, but we've made a note of the evaluation, understanding the capacity, and being very proactive. Okay. Staff will work through the city manager. There were a number of council members that wanted to have some clarification of this. Of course, that is the council manager form of government. You hire the city manager and she hires everybody else. But having some clarification, and then a specific question, should staff work back through the city manager, not directly answer a council member? So there was just some confusion on what this actually means. And I thought it might be helpful for Deanna to actually start with what is your process and what do you expect of council members, or what you'd like from council members, what do you expect of your staff?
So what I have stated before is that I am fine with council members reaching out to director level as well as in the city manager's office for issues that are of concern. I do ask that you copy me so that I can be informed of what you're concerned about or just the nature of your interest. It helps me stay better aligned to the council and better understand what the issues are. And staff at the department level, at the department director level, know that if they do receive information to get me in the loop immediately so that we can respond accordingly. That's been my practice. It works for me, and I hope it seems as if it's worked for the council, but perhaps it's just worth restating that that's the protocol that I prefer.
Yeah. And I'm going to actually flip to number 9 because I think there was a little bit of confusion between what's 7 and then what's 9. So as we update these, we probably just need to consolidate these into one, because I think this one is what you were speaking to, I believe, Deanna. So council members may communicate either directly with the city manager or speak to directors on specific issues. Directors are advised to let the city manager know as soon as practical. I mean, that's your direction to them. They do that. And so forth. But there was some confusion, so I'd like to open it up to council members about what do you think you should be doing?
I think I'm going to start by saying I always make it a process to go, a practice to communicate directly with the city manager or city attorney, no matter what. And I find that over the years where there has been tension and stress on our department heads and other employees in the city is when council members go directly to them and try to get what they want for whatever reason. It does cause a lot of stress for that department head talking directly to council members and feeling awkward about it. I think everyone, I just practice this and it's just easier to go directly to the city manager with the issue and let the city manager's office then disseminate, the information and then get back, or the city attorney. And many times I copy both of them on my emails just so for, consistency. But I think it's a good practice. It's what I've used and I've never had really any issues with it. And then a lot of times in the past, I know other council members, and even I have been accused of councilmanic interference if you go to a department head and say something, and that's why I keep it a practice. I don't do that. I just go directly to our appointed, officers of the city, and then you avoid any of those, charges or anything else that you're giving anybody direction. So that's just what I do, and I think it really is the safest way to operate. And then the city manager and the city attorney can keep track of where all the issues are and the concerns of the council member, because otherwise I don't know how you keep track of of all of us if we're going directly to department heads and, asking questions or, pressuring for them to do something and that they're uncomfortable with. So why even put them in that position?
Okay. Other council members? Yes, go ahead, Debbie.
I have regional meetings, so I deal with Gary for water, but Deanna she knows that, and if I have a
Okay.
conversation with Gary, he says, I'm going to tell Deanna we had this conversation, which is a great thing, because then I don't have to go back to her. He will do it and say, this was talked about, or whatever. But he goes with me to these meetings. I work with him on 2 regional things. So I spend a lot of time with him. So we have that kind of relationship.
That's a regional appointment, so that's the mayor's
So he
appointment
is-
of you.
Right.
Got it.
So I work in that capacity, and then I have another one where I have to go to staff through the manager to get information about legislative actions that are in another regional committee that I have. So I do spend some time with staff, but it's through Deanna. So she knows what's going on. So and I had another one that just came up recently, and the staff, I didn't have time to get to her, but the staff said, oh, guess what? I told Deanna that what this idea was or something. So those are the kind of things, I don't know, is that considered councilmanic interference, or am I drawing the line here, or?
If the council prefers to just communicate with me and the city attorney, I am completely fine with that. I actually think, just given where we're at with respect to governance and all of the elections next year, it's a way for me to really stay tight and close with the council. I do recognize Gary he's a model director in that he advances the agendas. I mean, the amount of communication that I receive from him about his interaction with Councilmember Davis is, I hold it up to the other executive leadership team members, because it really is a model in terms of how to work in the original structure that I talked with. But I'm very open, based on what the mayor said, and just given what's in front of us next year. I don't want to get in the way of the elections or things of that sort. And so if it's a measure that helps, which is, sticking more closer to our governance structure, I'm fine with that too.
And if Deanna's not available, then what's the backup? Is it one of the assistant city managers?
She lets us know who's in charge.
Okay. No, I mean, if she's literally out of the office that day, but.
And actually, I've had that experience, like with one of the committees that I serve on regarding Caltrain, and like we have an issue coming up where the business plan, they're going to be making decisions about the business plan, and so each city needs to have their input. So I'm meeting, actually Friday with Director Moback, and I'm sure somebody else. But I made the request, to the city manager, copying, the director, and so we're having a meeting. But inevitably, whenever I make a request, if the city manager can't be there, an assistant city manager is there. So that line of communication and what is discussed, it's communicate to everybody, so everybody's on the same page, going forward. And I really appreciate that, that they make themselves available, and it's not just that department, but all of the departments. I mean, they're wonderful examples of, just, how we can communicate and get, just make sure that things are moving forward. And I always appreciate the city manager, being engaged in that process as well.
I think the distinction is that on these regional committees, and we have several, we have the sewer treatment plant, we have our electrical public power commissions, we have the water district things, we have VTA. So when you're the council representative on those committees or commissions, the city manager will have appointed a staff person to staff those commissions or committees. And so our communication directly with that staff person is really at the behest of the city manager. So that is the city manager's representative. So in that sense, we are communicating directly with the city manager. I think that the distinction lies when it's a city issue, or somebody's come to us and they have, problem with their street trees, that I refer that to city manager, not directly to a staff person or department head even, because that is directing the department head what to do. So I think we all understand those distinctions. So in essence, our policy then is to just go through the city manager or the city attorney if it's a legal issue. And that is the right thing to do.
So it sounds like there is a pretty strong consensus then, is just communicate through the city manager, and the city manager does appoint staff to work with council members on these regional committees. And then that is your staff liaison, who then keeps the city manager well informed. So is that a good summary of it?
It's a
Yes.
consensus, but we still have issues. I had one just not last week, but the week before, a complaint about a council member. So I'm saying we should stick to it and
Stick to it.
actually practice it.
Yeah.
So
And just one comment I would have is that sometimes a council member might, in very good faith, think you're simply inquiring about something, but the department head, or especially below, but even a department head might hear it as direction, might hear it that way. Does not mean at all that you have stated it that way, but it has taken it in that way. So that's one of the things that I'm sure that Deanna's constantly working with her department heads on. So, Raj, did you have your hand up?
Just touching base on the communication part of the regional committees.
Regional committees.
It is not pertaining to this one. I fully agree with what we are doing on communicating within the city. We have regional committees, but I think the council as whole lacks the communication in what's happening in those regional committees. If we can improve some communication within the council for those what's happening on those committees, that would be great.
Okay, let's just make a note of that as sort of not directly related to this, because it's
But just came
kind of it's almost a bike rack item, but it's communicating the outcome of those or the progress on those regional committees to the entire council. I just want to capture that. Okay, so we're making good progress, by the way. It's 11:10. City Council will consult the city manager often to ensure the council's action aligned to administrative resources, protocols, and values. So the clarification that was posed to me had to do with, is this referring to media calls and giving the right information to the public? Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie. Did I?
You went from 7 to 9.
Oh.
Because they were related, so you missed number 8.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. No. I'm glad you're right. Yeah, 7 and 9 were related. And let's go here with the one-on-one meetings. You're exactly right. So this was one of the commitments, and the feedback that I received from council members was those need to be scheduled. Yes.
And I know I was one of these.
Okay.
So what happened was we have scheduled one-on-ones with the city manager. And then I hadn't seen the city manager like in 6 months because I was told I was supposed to make the meeting with her.
Okay.
Then I was told I was supposed to go through her assistant. So there was some confusion on how to schedule these.
Okay.
Because in the beginning, they were scheduled on a consistent basis.
Okay.
And a couple of mine were blown out because Deanna had to do something else, which was okay. But then it wasn't rescheduled. So then I told you, I think, in conversation that when I could get her to talk to her, that was where I was living.
Got it.
So it was hard where, but yesterday I got her for a whole half hour. I was so happy, because it's been a while. But I think that we have to figure out a process where we get to see her so that the communication is contiguous with all of us, because I think Councilmember O'Neill alluded to the fact that maybe something was said to one person and should have been said to another person, or thought was said to another person. So I want to eliminate that void.
Got it.
And get back into a consistent one-on-one so that, Deanna has time to deal with all of us on whatever issues that come down the pike. So, and I got to spend time, so it was really nice. And I came in there with my little thing and I said, okay, we're ready. So, and it's hard, and her time is valuable, our time is valuable. I get this. But I think we need to be consistent in some kind of schedule going forward, because I don't know how they all feel. But this was one of my bones of contention, that I kind of felt like, I would come down to the office and I would hope and pray I would get her for 5 minutes before she went to another meeting. So that's kind of an issue, because we are part-time.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those things where how do we get together, so to speak? And I was fortunate because it was right before a council meeting, and I was in the building, she was in the building. So how do we do that? And what is the protocol for that? And how do we spend more time with our city manager?
So I think one of the fixes is that we now have Julie, the executive assistant, who can be in partner with Kathy in making sure that we get on the calendar. I think there was just some hiccup there in terms of some of the normal things that the council has practiced, like boards and commission monthly dinners and things of that sort, that just fell through the cracks with the shortage of staff that we've been having. But I did send an email out in July asking if for those that want one-on-ones to let's get started. And I'm seeing them populating on my calendar. So
Right.
it feels like that's an area that we're closing up.
Okay. So it sounds like this remains as an important commitment to hold those one-on-one meetings, I guess, for the council members who desire to have those one-on-one meetings, and to the extent that your schedule permits it. But the city manager has a commitment to getting them scheduled. So.
I think it's like having date night with your significant other. Yeah. It's very important. Yes, it keeps that, bond.
That's very good. Okay, good. Okay, so Debbie, thank you for bringing me back to this.
Sorry,
No, I'm glad you did. That's good. Okay, so let's see. Okay, there was a clarification needed as to whether this is referring in some way to media calls and giving the right information to the public. So I'm not quite sure. Does anybody have a good understanding of what this one is? Or maybe Deanna, do you have a good understanding of what number 10 is? I think, I know that one comment I heard from a council member.
I don't know.
Might have been.
Sometimes something will blow up in the city.
Yeah.
And like we had a fire. We had a major fire.
Okay.
And the mayor had to get out there. And so when something like that happens, I don't know if we have a central place or the PIO or whatever. I don't know what that way of getting information to the public or to us, or fielding who's going to be where. I mean, and this happened in, whose district was this? This was yours? No, Raj's. So it was like one of those things where everybody was going, what's going on? And I don't know what's happening. And social media blew up.
Okay.
So how do we need like a central place where either we all contact the city manager or the PIO contacts us, or let's just know kind of like what's going on. And then we can get the right information out to the public, not the crazy information. So, so I just use the fire as an example, but there are other things that happen, and right away, it's like next door is perfect. There was choppers flying around, and somebody on next door is going, "What's going on? What's going on?" And we don't know what's happening. So it's like one of those things. Like, how do we get that information to whoever, or how do we communicate with staff? Or I think we need to know where that all falls, or what the protocol may be.
So this is one area where Councilmember Davis is a model council member in terms of things happening at or around the community. She'll give me a heads up, and then I can determine how to push out information in through my blog or respond to it operationally. I would appreciate you have your eyes and ears out, as the mayor has already said. The level of activity on behalf of council members is very high. It allows for me then to understand how is it that I focus resources to communicate or to respond accordingly. That would be very helpful for me. I know Councilmember Watanabe also with issues around drag racing or trucks being parked here or there, or lights or speeding. That has helped me as well. But that, I think, is a key component to the city services being successful as well, where we appear responsive to even the most, sometimes the most smallest of constituent issues that is very meaningful for that area of town.
So what I'm hearing in this conversation is that it's not just consulting with, but it's informing the city manager. It's keeping the city manager informed so that then Deanna and her staff can get the information out that you need. So if there's something going on in the community that one of you find out about or hear about, then letting the city manager know, because maybe she hasn't heard about it yet. And then she can get information out to you. So it's more of that two-way street. So I think this probably needs to be reworded. So it's not just consulting, but it's informing, is what I'm hearing. Does that make sense?
I don't understand this one because I see the top aligns to administrative resource protocols and values, and then the feedback is
About the media.
referring to media calls and giving the right information to the public. So Councilmember Davis talked about the fire. That was something that happened that we all noticed quickly in the public. And I think Nadine was the acting city manager there because Nadine and I were standing on the corner looking at the fire at the time. And I think it's in Patty's district, not Raj's district. But and so we're standing there and we're looking at the fire, and there's all these news cameras there and other things, and they're putting it in my face. And so I think communication is, I have a huge issue with our communication in Santa Clara and how we get things out, getting the right information, the correct information out. I feel like I'm not ever hardly prepared to get that, and I think that has to improve. So I can see getting the right information to the public, accurately, because things happen. A lot of times we find out about things on social media, on Twitter, on Nextdoor, before our city manager even knows, because maybe the police department didn't tell her or the fire department didn't tell her. I read about a lot of things on, in the newspaper or on Twitter that we're not even informed about. So I think it's important that if we're going to be asked to respond, that we do get the information, we get it in a timely manner with facts about what's happening. Because when Nadine and I were standing there on the corner, we couldn't get any information from anybody, so there was no communication. We just were winging it because we were looking at the fire. So I think that definitely needs to improve in terms of us being prepared in the event of situations that happen, boom, like that. But also, in a longer term, when there's situations in neighborhoods or in districts, how do we get the right information out? So it's all about communication and our ability to provide it in a timely manner and accurately to the public.
Okay. We'll write something up that captures that this doesn't capture that. So Mandy's taken some notes here, and we'll write something up that will be a new one that captures that about communications, for those instances that need something immediate, as well as other kinds of communications. Yes, Patricia.
Well, to me, too, this means that we don't make a commitment to a constituent or a resident without consulting the city manager, oh yeah, I'll get your sidewalk fixed tomorrow, those kinds of things, that we really make sure that we have the resources and it fits with our values and it fits with our priorities, and we're not out there just making promises, that really don't align with what our policies are at the time, or our priorities are.
Maybe, the way you stated that is maybe a little bit more clear than the way this is written right now. So we might be able to slightly modify that, and so keep a version of this so that it's really clear to everybody, and then add the other one on communication. So they're quite separate, I think. I think they're quite separate. Deanna?
Like some of our other resources, our communications is very decentralized in the organization. Each department pushes out social media information or newsletters or any other way to get out information. I also don't have a handle of that. And internally in the manager's office, we do put in advance of the next week, we put out what are the social media postings that we're going to be focused on by way of city services to feature. And what I can do is work to tighten that up within the organization so that just like I receive in advance what our communications office through Lenka is going to be publishing on social media, I can work to get some of the department information to give the council in advance through the biweekly report in terms of what are the communication strategies that we're looking at from a department level. So that's something that will take some time, but we can certainly work towards that.
Okay, good. So there are a number of steps that are going to be taken, it looks like. Okay. So then there were a couple of new commitments that were proposed. And since these are going to be ongoing commitments, one is simply to have in writing that all items discussed in closed session will remain confidential. The concern that was stated was that the council doesn't have this as a formal stated norm, and other cities do have that as a formal stated norm, and it should be explicit. Of course, it's embedded in the law, as Brian will say, too. But it was proposed to have it actually written down as a norm. So I don't know what council members as a body think about that, or Brian.
I don't really know if this needs to be written down because this is the Brown Act prohibits disclosure of matters. We already have a state law that prohibits it. I don't know if we need to additionally add it as a commitment. I mean, the state has committed you to this, and if you feel you need to be reminded of it, please let me know. But I don't really think you need to be reminded of it. I think you all know that you're not allowed to reveal any matters that are revealed in closed session outside of closed session. So I'm not sure we need to add it. If you'd like to, you can, but it is a provision of the Brown Act that you'll be in violation of state law if you reveal matters that were discussed in closed session.
I understand it's a law, and I understand that everybody on our council knows that it's the law. But the reality is sometimes we have closed sessions and then we get some information the next day that shows that maybe some of that information was leaking out. So I think that it is the law, and maybe each council member should sign something that says they understand it, because most of us know about information that has gone out of closed session. And I think it's really terrible that happens, because it's really, it's not doing our duties. It's not doing, following the law, putting the city first, and it's selling out the city. But it happens. It's happened with previous council members, and it happens. So I think that a refresher course on it, or having us sign something to remind us how important it is to keep this information confidential. Because when you have closed session and all of a sudden things start coming out later that says, how would that group know that we talked about this? It's just too much of a coincidence. So I think it's important that we have a refresher course or something that we commit to in writing that we're going to keep it confidential, because I'm not certain that it always is confidential.
Other comments from council members?
Both of those things are good ideas. Refresh your course and sign the pledge.
I mean, there are city councils with council protocols or norms that do state something like that, even though it is certainly, it is in the Brown Act, it's in state law, but for the very reason that you have other norms that are stated, that these are things that we're committed to, it would be for the same reason to do that. So if the general consensus of the council is that it's okay to add this, then we can add this as one. I don't see any objection here. And then it sounds like there's a suggestion for a refresher course, and that's something that the city attorney would presumably do at some point.
I mean, I can certainly do it. I don't think it would take very much time, but I can certainly schedule something to
Okay?
move forward. And I think it's something I could do in open session. It's something I could just put on a future council agenda
Great.
to just remind everybody what the protocol is for closed session items.
I like the idea of going out into the public with that.
Well, I don't think there'd be any reason for me to do it in closed session anyway.
No. What I'm saying is to bring that out.
Okay.
And I think one of the other topics that I think sometimes we get questions about what it is that we're talking about in closed session. And I know that oftentimes that, like you do kind of tell us if we're going off topic. I think oftentimes the public questions, why are we even talking about anything in closed session? So if you were going to do a refresher to maybe go over the parameters of what we can talk about in closed session versus open session would be helpful for us and for the public.
Great.
Good idea.
I'll take all that into account when I prepare my report.
You have your homework cut out for you.
Something I'm happy to do.
And maybe look into what other cities are doing in terms of protocol or signing, disclaimers, waiver that, that they will, take a pledge.
Okay. Or I could give a quiz at the end of the, at the, end of the session.
So it sounds like Brian's going to take all that into
Got
account.
a half a sheet of
when he comes
paper.
back. Okay,
See what you
very
like.
good. Okay. And then the second, and let's see, this is the last one on this list. We're making really good time, everybody. The second proposed commitment was council members will ask their questions about agenda items in advance to enable staff to answer the questions and be well prepared for the council meeting. So, yeah, well, the one that we talked about before was that when you ask your questions in advance, that the city manager then now pushes the answer out to everybody. So we did talk about that. This is a commitment that council members will ask your questions in advance to the extent that you know what they are. I mean, something may occur to you at the council meeting and you couldn't have asked it. But when you know what those questions are, it's respectful of staff, of their staff time, and it allows them to both A, get your question answered, which is efficient, and B, it allows them to prepare. And one of the things I like to just say to council members is that when people are hired, I'll just pick on a young assistant planner who might be making a council presentation because it's good professional development. That person may be working on a project. But if you're throwing a question at this young assistant planner that you knew that you were going to ask and that you didn't ask it in advance, that person might freeze up. It's really not fair to that person. But if you had asked that question in advance, that person has an opportunity to think about, okay, how am I going to answer it? I can be poised, I can be ready, and then I can be the competent assistant planner that I am and feel good about it, as opposed to then going home and having a sleepless night and thinking, oh gosh, I should have known that was coming. Well, it's just, that's the partnership. So you don't always know what you need to ask, but when you know, that's what this is about. So that was, I don't remember which one of you asked that, it doesn't matter, but one of you proposed that.
I didn't propose this, but I just know that when I read my reports and then I ask questions at the council meeting, I try to keep in mind what questions the public may have for the answers. But then there are council members, and in the past and the present, that ask a lot of questions that border on really, really micromanaging. And sometimes we have to be able to trust our professional staff. Yes. Like, I'm not going to question, if an engineer has a report that, did you use this angle or that angle, because I'm not qualified to do that. But I have to trust that they are, giving the right answers. But what, if there's really those type of micromanaging questions, then I really try to ask them ahead of time. But really keep in mind what interest does the public have on this, and understand that, as you talked about, we're a very dynamic city. And we're involved in a lot, and our council meetings go on and on and on and on. And sometimes we belabor points like to no end. But we have to put ourselves in the seats of the public watching us and being not only informative but efficient and moving forward, and what do we think that they would want to know about this issue, or what questions could we ask about that issue? And I think we should always keep the public in mind when we're dealing with certain issues. And if you really want to dig deep in a lot of these things, try to do it ahead of time. And then the city manager, I like this new process where she can advertise those answers. So if you really want to dig deep, those answers are available, and they're available to all of us ahead of time, because we have council members that will ask ahead of time and, ask staff, and they will take a lot of time and then continue to go to the council meeting and ask the same thing and take all the time. But sometimes you can say, I asked this question ahead of time and this is the answer I got, and I think this is beneficial to the public. So you don't have to wait for the city manager to re-answer the question again. You can say, I got this information and I thought the public should know. So I think there's different ways of doing it where we move things along, but do it, look at the lens of our residents watching us and what information do they want to know.
Yeah, I think there's the lens of the public, and then there's also the lens of the staff person sitting there as well. And as in this environment of trying to attract
It's not a gotcha
people.
situation. Oh, I caught you off guard, and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's really
I found
important.
something because I read my packet.
Yeah, and some, as you're trying to recruit people, and they watch council meetings and they realize, oh gosh, I'm going to be sitting there in front of that council, and they're going to be, trying to do a gotcha. That's a factor. And so, and I'm not saying that happens with this council, but in some councils it does happen. And so to the extent, this is all about, to the extent that you can just give the staff a heads up, got these questions, get them back to you, and then do, as the mayor is suggesting, say, had these questions, got them answered, and then you don't need to rehash everything. That's really helpful.
I think that the process that Deanna came up with to get them ahead of time, because I was guilty one time when poor Nadine was running a council meeting, and I was kind of behind the curve a little bit, and I had 8 questions, and she ran up to me and she's got everything, and I'm going, okay, I just need backup, that's all I need, but I'm not going to yank all these things off the consent calendar. And she was feeding me the information, trying to get to a council meeting. So I apologize for that. I did not mean to do that. It was like horrible to do to you. And she survived that. But the other thing is that with the city manager, when she asks us these questions, there are things on the consent calendar that I might pull, but I'll tell her about that because I want the public to understand what went down or how the process happened. And I know Councilmember O'Neill is, we kind of think, well, maybe the staff, they did a great job. Maybe the city needs to know, or that residents need to know what's happened and how that process happened. So when I give her that heads up, she's ready with staff and they're on cue. So when we get to that item and then we pass it and whatnot, but we have that ability to get that information out to people. But I think that we're cognizant of our time and their time.
Yes.
And I think that, her new process is probably going to work for us.
Good. Okay.
I just want to
Apologize.
acknowledge that when we get the advance notice of what items are going to be pulled and on what topic the questions will surface, that really helps staff out. It allows for them to focus and support the meeting much more effectively.
Super. Good. Okay. So now we are moving on to the procedures list. And we have 25 minutes before lunch. And who knows, maybe we get through this before lunch. I don't know. We'll see. If we do, we do. So under procedural issues, and I would say after today, maybe this gets reframed a little bit. Last time in December, we're really just starting the ball rolling on this whole thing and discussing what is a district issue. I think that was a question that these questions and issues came up during my interviews with all of you for the last workshop. And so I just populated a whole list. And at the last time, council members thought, well, geographic boundaries, something in the district, land use, and so forth. But then comments from this last round of interviews, I heard from council members saying, well, land use is not really, necessarily a district issue because it affects the entire city or, a big portion of the city. And then discussing what's the right balance between a district concern and a concern. Now, this gets back to the very first principle that we talked about today. So I don't know that we actually need to rediscuss this, but this was the first item on this list. Is there any need for us to rediscuss this?
Well, I just want to talk about the land use is not
Okay.
a district issue. Santa Clara is small enough that land use decisions in one area impacts other areas, but it is an issue because it does impact the representative from
Okay.
that district. So it absolutely does impact because our districts are small enough that the developments that occur, except for District 1, I make that an exception because of all the
It's
developments
an
there.
exception.
She's an exception, but that's an exception. But they do have a big impact on the council member from that district to be able to address the constituents for that, even though land use affects traffic in the whole city, housing in the whole city, resources, use of resources for public safety and all these, public works, all the other issues. But it really affects the council member.
So that's the distinction, is that it's going to affect the whole city in one way or the other, but it's going to particularly affect that council member, and to acknowledge that, be aware of that. Okay. So the next one is a more practical, procedural thing. How will staff route calls from residents? And the middle section, comments and questions, that was from my last round of interviews. There is some confusion about this, about what is the current practice. So I'm wondering, Deanna, if you might be able to, or Nadine or someone on staff, talk about what happens when calls come in and they need to be routed to the right council member.
So I think in large part, people know where to call with respect to the departments or use my Santa Clara app. There are some unique instances where residents send an email to the mayor and council or to council members directly, and it's forwarded to me and to the appropriate staff. We take that in, we log it into the systems that we're using to track data, and then we respond. And oftentimes, we respond directly to the person, or sometimes we'll copy the council member. It's not we gauge. It's not a perfect science in terms of the protocols. It's generally based on the severity of topic. If it's something like a lights out, we'll just go handle it, right? But if there's something more like if there's a dangerous traffic condition that has generated a lot of community input, we'll work with the council member on those matters more closely.
I think part of the confusion that I heard in my interviews was, does staff then route the call to the council member within the district that the issue is in? Is that happening?
No, we do not.
Okay.
So we get a lot of calls and emails in the mayor and council offices, and we have been woefully short-staffed probably for several months until recently, finally, we have somebody. Now, Julie, our new mayor and council, so we have two people and then a temporary person. So we're finally getting that on board now, but it's been months where we haven't. So a lot of things, I'm going to say a lot of emails have fallen through the cracks. I know personally they have. And when we get emails in, I think for the most part, we all get them. They're not routed to us. It's up to us to really look at them and read them. And in many cases, we'll get emails that for mayor and council, and it's in certain districts, and the person will come back, how come no one's gotten back to me? I don't have any answers. You guys are ignoring me. What are you doing? So a lot of times I'll refer people to city manager's office and they'll work with it, but it's hit and miss whether I get a follow-up. Yes, this was taken care of. And I get so many that I lose track of where which ones are followed up, which ones aren't, until sometimes the residents are upset and they'll call back, well, you said you were going to follow up and you never did. So I think we have to come up with a better system now that we're almost fully staffed in the mayor and council offices to deal with a lot of those issues. But our residents, as our city manager calls them, we're a high-touch community. Our residents want responses, and they want them in a very timely manner, and we need to respond to them. And I think that things are not happening we're not running as smoothly as we should. So we're still finding our legs on that. But what does it go to certain council members for the district? We all get everything. And it's up to us to look at it, and some do and some don't. So there's no consistency with the council either in terms of who is responding and who isn't.
I actually think this is, and the mayor and I have talked about this while Julie was in the process of being hired. I actually think this is a place where you could have a dedicated staff person who just takes in and tracks that information and reports back to the council member and works with the departments to get the response and make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. This is one where originally when we did the recruitment process, we had 2 really good candidates. We wanted to bring one person in to just staff that component, and the person declined. And it's a firsthand reflection of just the recruitment and the nature of recruitment. You get really close to someone, and then all of a sudden they take a turn. And so I do believe that this is an area where a dedicated resource would really be helpful for the mayor and council offices as well as the manager's office.
Okay. That recruitment for our office generated how many responses? Wasn't there?
80, 90?
Yeah. Okay. So we had 100 responses for the assistant for the mayor and council. So we actually want that second position in our office. So we haven't forgotten that. But in terms of the city manager's right, it was in terms of the community outreach for us, following up on those things. And that is what's missing from our support. We don't have that support right now.
So the follow-up sounds like a couple of steps. One is to improve the system itself, and 2 is to increase the resources.
And to have almost 100 people applying for that job, maybe we can take some of those
I'm
people
happy
and
to
look
go
for
look at
some of the other jobs as
I'm
well.
happy to go look at the applications again and see if there's folks that we can invite back.
And look at it creatively. I know there was some, selections of, oh, well, if they didn't have this and they're off. I mean, I think we need to really take a close look at some of these people, not just for our office, but for other opportunities in the city. For that one position, having that many people apply, they may be interested in other opportunities for our city as well.
Like I had heard, and I don't know if this is accurate, that if somebody only had private sector experience and didn't have any public sector experience, they weren't being considered. Well, I myself think, in the past, one of the several executive assistants ago was somebody who had executive assistant experience at HP and Agilent. So
That's not true. In fact, the candidate that we really liked was from the private sector and declined to accept the offer. I do also want to remind us that we operate in a civil service recruitment environment, and I am so bound to the civil service rules. I cannot just receive one application for one position and transition it to another vacancy. The person has to self-elect to apply for that position, and I am under a microscope when it comes to managing the civil service process. So,
well,
it comes with a lot of limitations and effort.
Well, in terms of, getting temp workers, or maybe for public records or our office or something like that, we need to look at other creative ways of hiring and filling some of these, because I know the civil service process takes so long to hire someone that what other flexibility do we have in creative ways, knowing the position that we're in? Maybe we can look at that. And in terms of temporary workers.
It's the as needed that gives us the flexibility.
We get us some more flexibility on that. And I thought our person worked for a city, the one we offered the position to. Anyways.
But anyway, it sounds like there's some possible solutions on the horizon there, which is good. Yeah, it sounds like tomorrow or yesterday preferably. Okay. How will staff prioritize requests from council members? There was a question back in December. The answer then was continue the existing process. So comments from July had to do with, what is the existing process? And then we've already talked about the referral process, and that's going to be handled on a separate track. How to manage expectations from constituents and districts regarding how quickly things get done. So those were the issues that came up in July. So Deanna, how does staff prioritize requests from council members?
So when we get referrals from at council meetings, we debrief on them at our weekly executive leadership team, and we go through them and make sure that the direction is understood. And so that occurs on a weekly basis. And then I'll go through the report and say, when are we going to close these items, and what are the milestones, and how, more importantly, are we going to close it, whether it's a committee report, an information memo, or things of that sort. From issues of inquiry or follow-up or information, I generally go in my office either to the assistant city manager charged with that area of oversight, or to the department director, his or himself, and follow up on issues, right? So yesterday there was an inquiry about what are we doing for promoting Art and Wine Festival. Well, I went to Cynthia and to Jim Teixeira to find out what are we doing, and I'm getting a whole media strategy, sometime today in terms of what the rollout is. So it is, if it's a service delivery operational issue, I go straight to the department. If there's just inquiries that just are easy to close up, I go to either the assistant city managers or to the department directors.
Okay. So is there an issue among council members about the follow-up? Or is that the question? How do things get followed up? Is that maybe somebody? Go ahead, Patricia.
Well, I think the mayor kind of identified the issue as far as follow-up, getting quick follow-up, because Santa Clara's had a very good reputation over the years of getting answers to people like within 24 hours, at least get an answer to say this is being looked into. I think it has been largely a staffing issue. So I think our policy is a good one. We have good expectations, but we do need the staffing, and I think that's being taken care of.
Got it. So it relates to the staffing in the mayor and council office, you think?
I don't know. We need some closure on some of the things. As I said, I refer so many things, and it's hit and miss whether I even get a follow-up, and then I don't, it's not consistent.
One of the things I had said, I think the city manager, somebody's using a spreadsheet. I had suggested at one point that I think we do need to have like a CRM system. Yeah. Because I agree that there's so many requests that come in, and like I said, those emails, and and I have people who then either call me or email me or come to my meetings and say, I've sent 12 messages in and nobody ever gets back to me. Well, I think in part people get the human nature of the staff, like, they get, but so I don't know, there's all kinds of different, that might help, and maybe somehow we prioritize or what. And, so I do think that in the past, because the volume of requests was a lot less, now, it just seems like people feel like they're getting inundated constantly.
So technology solutions, are you working on those?
Well, and figuring out, and we keep talking about the My Santa Clara app, but just figuring out how to get people to use that. So, because that does have a little bit more of a tracking, perhaps not as robust as we now need, but.
So an email will come into our offices, and we will send back something saying, thank you very much. The mayor and council has received your request, and it's been forwarded to the city manager, city whoever it's forwarded to. Thank you very much. We'll get back to you, and then I don't know what happens after that.
Okay.
For the most part.
Okay. So what's the follow-up on it?
I think it's tracking, building a matrix to track that information.
Okay.
It's getting the resources in place to be very specific and targeted on those types of referrals, and close with the council in terms of a weekly report or a biweekly report based on what that resource is performing. And
Really a system solution and a staffing.
I do also
combined.
think, though, this is an opportunity to just do what last year we launched a campaign of My Santa Clara. The usage with the community really peaked I do think it's an opportunity to do it again, because once you log into My Santa Clara, it's an opportunity to track the system is built to provide a response to you, to track the information, and to allow for us to collect data about the service request. And so that is the preferred way, because that's the city system. But I understand that there's just going to be the more higher touch responses, and I think that's where we need more resources in the mayor and council office.
Okay, so we've captured those ideas, so there's more to follow up on that. Great, okay. We've already talked about this. Will the city manager continue to provide information to the entire council? So we've already talked about that, so some of this is duplicative, so we'll eliminate the duplication as we refine this.
There was what is that? What information does the city manager provide the mayor and not to the
Oh, yeah,
entire
that's right,
council?
thank you.
That's
Yeah.
new.
Yeah, the second bullet point, right.
Well, I know that I meet with the city manager and the city attorney and city clerk's office prior to each meeting. So we talk and we go over what's going to happen during the meetings and where might be, I usually point out where there might be extended discussion and
Okay.
what to look for and most of that information. Sometimes when there are issues that come up in the city of a very important nature, and usually I'm the first point of contact, usually, not always, in terms of things that are happening, but the city manager does a really good job of getting information out to the council. But just because I'm the mayor, I do get information sometimes prior to, a few minutes prior to the rest of the council, but I don't know whoever had that concern.
I would
needs
just
more.
add that because the mayor is the mayor, oftentimes the media wants to talk with the mayor.
Yes.
And they don't necessarily want to talk to a department director or our PIO. And so oftentimes I'll coordinate with the mayor for a quote and have her inform it or redraft it or approve it.
Yeah, it's a very typical role for the mayor to serve as a spokesperson for the media. Okay. Let's see. If someone calls me and they are in another district, can I help them? I think you've already addressed that earlier, and you are already doing that. You are already helping them. And what I heard earlier is that, and you are suggesting or letting them know who their district representative is. You're doing both, is what I'm hearing.
I also think it's a responsibility of the council members to be responsive to the members of their district.
Yes.
Whether they choose to or not is up to them, but I really think it shows, well upon our council when we're responsive to our residents, especially those in your own district.
And it's up to each council member to do that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So the second question there, though, somebody on the council asked, what is the responsibility of the council member who speaks with a resident not in his or her district to notify the district council member? So somebody contacts Debbie, who happens to live in Patricia's district. Debbie knows the answer, helps the person. Is Debbie supposed to call Patricia? Or no? I mean, what?
I think it's nice. I mean, if you remember to do that, I think that is helpful, just so in case the council member wants to reach out to that person.
I mean, is that kind of a norm you would like to have? I mean,
I think that would be great, especially as I mentioned, the next door thing. Some of the things getting on the next door which are not, doesn't even come to the picture of a different council member. It would be nice to bring that council member into the picture. Oh, this thing happened, so we reply to this thing or something.
so just more out of respect and
Within-
an awareness, letting each other know if somebody is talking with you. And they might know you better. They might be more comfortable for whatever reason because they've known you for 10 years or whatever. But yet let the council member know.
I had instances where I CC'd the other council member who was in the district, even though I replied to it. I CC'd the other council member.
Okay, so you CC the council member. Okay.
So I guess the question is, how would that notification take place? Do we go through the council, mayor and council office to say, forward this to the council member? Does the council member call the other council member, email them directly? How does that notification take place?
Yeah, I mean, would you want to be as direct and efficient as possible so that you would contact each other and say, so-and-so called me?
Possible with our council members, but do we want to put that burden on the mayor and council staff person to do that? I mean, that's my question, is how would that?
Yeah, how to do that.
take place?
How are you doing that now? Let me ask you that. How do you do that now if somebody calls or contacts any one of you who's not in your district?
I personally always ask the requester of the meeting or the phone call, I tell them what district that their concern is in, and then I recommend that they contact that district council member. So that's what I always do because it's just easier for me. But we all get the same emails from a lot of the residents. And sometimes if the district council member is not responsive, even though they got the emails, the resident will reach out to another council
else.
member to help them. So is it the responsibility of that council member to tell the original council member that they, responded even though we all got the emails? I think it's up to each individual council member to deal with their own district if they do not want to deal with their own district and we all get the information. I think that's incumbent upon them to do it. But if you get a call from a resident that has an issue, it's nice to send an email to say, hey, this resident is, concerned about something in your district. Here's the contact information. It shouldn't be too hard. We can just email the council member or forward the concern.
It sounds like that's what Raj is doing now, sending a CC to the council member saying, you talked to so-and-so. It's actually somebody in somebody else's district. So out of spreading information, sharing information.
We just have some council members that are more active than others. So, it's not, I don't think it's any council member's responsibility unless, that one council member doesn't want to talk to someone in their district, then, they reach out. But I think sending a quick email without putting the responsibility on staff to do that is just more efficient.
It sounds like what I'm seeing heads nod, that the responsibility remains with the council members to inform each other, and rather than having the staff try to do that. Okay.
I would say if the email comes to mayor and council, then automatically the council member should take care of it. It doesn't matter, other council member is not responsible to inform that council member. But if the email only comes to a different council member, then it becomes a primary duty to
That's different.
inform the other.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay, this again came up in December. Can a council member have monthly meetings open to anyone in the community? And the answer then was yes, and I think it's still yes, right? I didn't hear in my interviews any change on that, so the answer is still yes. So we'll change that from a question to a protocol.
There was a little confusion when, because I think here, I could be wrong and everyone can speak up, but I think Councilmember O'Neill's the only one who has these monthly meetings.
I see.
There was a question when she's been doing this since she has been elected. Yes. So it's normal. But she was having her monthly meetings in a location that was outside her district. So some of the people were saying, should she be having these in her district? I don't know if you're having them in your district now, or are they still outside your district? But I know that question did come up.
Yeah, it has come up. Somebody has mentioned that to me. I mean, so currently I'm still using the dining room of a restaurant that's not in my district. I looked at having it here at the library, but the library, I usually have it at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So the library isn't open. And then I wasn't sure whether I was being cheap and have to pay. Somebody said, well, the community rec center. And I said, well, I think, I'd have to pay
They
the
charge
fee.
you double. Right?
Yeah, they triple or whatever. So
So it's really a lack of just locations and resources. because not that she can have her community meetings anywhere she wants,
Anywhere.
but that question did come up in the community. Do you have to have it in your district? And I think the answer is no. It's just a matter of where the resources are available for you to be able to do that.
She's serving, we are supposed to be serving the entire city. So where she has them should have no bearing on what she does.
Right.
And they're consistent. She has regular people
Mm-hmm.
that come to her meetings, so.
Yeah. And all the districts are not even in terms of the number of restaurants and the number of this.
No, but we do have a lack of meeting space, city manager.
So that's consistent. Yeah, that is consistent. Okay.
Are we
So-
going to break for
Oh,
lunch?
you know what? It
or-
is noon.
I don't think
so-
we're going to finish.
Yeah, no, we're not going to finish, but we're very close. So let's go ahead and have a break. Can we restart at 12:30 sharp?
Let's do that.
And if you finish up earlier, we can start before that? Yeah.
Let's go.
Thank you.
So lunch is upstairs. Nadine, do you want to tell us where it's at?
Hillary's conference room.
Hillary's, okay, up there.